All right, guys, so here is the table I was showing you guys in the video on the front, is that there's a repeating pattern, all right? So if you want, you can flip back and look, but I to the first, or I to the zero, excuse me, anything to the zero power is 1. I to the first, anything to the first power is itself, so I. Okay. I squared was the one I told you guys are going to have to become really familiar with, which is -1. And then I to the third, we came up with -I. Okay. I to the fourth, we did it on the front side and we got 1. I to the fifth, we did on the front side and got I. I to the sixth, we did on the front side and got -1. And then we never did I to the seventh, but we talked that there's a pattern and that it's going to be what it's above, which is -I. Okay, we never did I to the eighth, but I'll tell you what, it's going to be 1. I to the ninth is going to be I to the 10th is going to be -1. And I to the is going to be -I. Okay. All right. So what's going to happen is they're going to give us what we call higher powers of I. So instead of like I to the 11th, we might have I to the 100th or something like that, where we're going to have to simplify them down into these lower powers of I that we have in our table here. All right. So since they repeat every 4, okay, we are going to do some maybe long division. Okay. I'll show you guys a way in your calculator too that you can do these a little bit easier. But what you have to do is you have to realize that they repeat in a cycle of 4. All right. And so I use what I like to call the iCloud. All right. Kind of like what your iPhone has. All right. So what I do is anytime I'm doing these higher powers of I kind of draw this little cloud, this little bubble, and I put the 4 basics that we have to know in there. All right. First one's easy. Anything to the 0 power is 1. Okay. Anything to the first power is itself. So I. If you have a tough time remembering I squared, okay, just go here and change it to a -1. Because I to the third, if you go here and change it to the -I, that's actually what the pattern is. So it goes 1I, -1, -I, 1I, -1, -I, 1I, -1, -I. So it's got that pattern, okay? I always think of I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the flying purple people eater. He has a one eye, one horn, flying purple people eater, 1 eye. So I always think 1 eye and then do the opposite, -1, -I, okay? All right, so what we do in our calculation, because they repeat every 4, we divide by 4. So if you do 0 and you divide it by 4, you would get 0. All right, so if we go ahead and we have 0 divided by 4, we get 0. And these are what I like to call like, not so much the remainder, but it would be more of the decimal, okay? And you'll see what I mean in a second. Okay. If we take our exponent of 1 and we divide it by 4, that's a quarter, which is a 0.25. And so that's the decimal that we're going to see in the calculator. Okay. If we take 2 and we divide it by 4, and we're dividing by 4 because they have a cycle or a repetitive pattern of 4. Okay. 2 fourths is 0.5. So there's the decimal we'll see in the calculator. Okay. All right. And then if we take 3 and divide by 4, that's 0.75. All right, so that's kind of the remainder or the decimal part that you're going to get in your calculator. Okay, and then you'll be able to match them. If you see 0.75, you're going to know that it's -I. If you see a 0.5 in your calculator, you're going to see -1. If you see a 0.25, you're going to know it reduces to I. And if you see a 0, which you're not going to see a 0, okay, and we'll talk about that, and you'll know that that's 1. Okay, so it might not make sense yet, but hang with me. Okay, and so here we go, guys. We're going to use this iCloud and simplify these larger powers of I. So it says simplifying the following powers of I. In number 13, we have I to the 51st power. All right, so we can continue our table to see what it simplifies down to, but that is going to make our table a lot longer up at the top of our page since it stops at I to the 11th. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to realize that we have to take 51 and we're going to divide it by 4. Okay, and in our calculator, that is it's not just 0.75, but we actually don't care about how many times 4 goes into 51. Okay, we're just only concerned about the decimal. So it's really 51 divided by 4 is 12.75. Okay, but we don't care about the 12 part of it. We only care about the 0.75, like the remainder part of it. Okay, and so we go to our table and we look at 0.75 in our little iCloud that we drew here, and we're going to realize that I to the 51st would end up in that column that has I to the third in it. Okay, But I to the third reduces to negative I. And so there it is. And we can skip this part. We don't really need to know that part. We just need to know that I to the 51st is the same exact value as negative I. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so we're going to do the process over again. In number 14, we have a coefficient here of negative 2, and that's just going to hang out for a few seconds. And we're going to take this I to the 45th. And we're going to take the exponent of 45, and we're going to divide it by 4 because our i's have a cyclic pattern of repeating every 4. Okay, and when we take 45 and we divide it by 4, we get 11.25. Again, we don't care about the 11 times that 4 goes into 45. We care about the remainder part, which is the 0.25. So we go to our table and we look at 0.25, okay, and we're going to realize that it is the same as I to the first, which is I. So this gets replaced with I. And negative 2 times I is negative 2I. And we can box it up, and there's our answer in simplest form. Okay, we're going to do it again. In number 15, we also have a coefficient of negative 4, and so that negative 4 is going to stay. And we're going to take this I to the 90th and simplify it down to a lesser power. All right, so we take our 90 and we divide it by 4. Okay, and 90 divided by 4 is 22.5, so 22.5. Again, we don't care about the 22, we just care about the 0.5. So we go to our table and we look for 0.5, and we realize that I to the 90th is the same thing as I squared, which is equal to negative 1. And so this I to the 90th gets replaced with negative 1. And negative 4 times negative 1 is positive 4. And that is finished. Okay, so that's how you simplify those powers of I. You have to make sure you divide by 4 and that you have your iCloud memorized and written down on your paper so that you can remember it. All right, so let's take a look at number 16. Okay, it says if f of x is equal to x cubed minus 2x squared, then f of I is equivalent to. So what they're doing is they're replacing this x, okay, with I. So all x's get replaced with I, and now it's going to read f of I is equal to I cubed, okay? In fact, I guess you can keep the parentheses, minus 2 times I squared, all right? And again, we don't really need the parentheses, so if you want to write this without parentheses, that's fine. So you got I cubed minus 2I squared, okay? So we're going to go ahead and use our cloud. Now, I can't see my cloud up there. And anytime I do this, and the more times you write it, the better you'll get at this, all right? So we're going to do I to the 0, I to the first, I to the second, I to the third. That's how we generate our cloud, okay? And we're going to go ahead and remember that anything to the 0 power is 1. Anything to the first power is itself, so I. And then this is the opposite of the first one, so negative 1. And this is the opposite of the second one, so negative I, okay? And then you're going to remember your decimals, okay? This would be a 0.0, a 0.25, a 0.5, and a 0.75. Think quarters, right? Okay. And here we go. So I to the third, if we look at our cloud, okay, is equal to negative I. So I to the third comes out, and negative I goes in. Okay. You keep your minus 2, and now we do it to I squared. I squared in our cloud is equal to negative 1, and so negative 1 goes in. All right. So we're going to clean this up a little bit. We're going to keep this negative I, but right here we have negative 2 times negative 1, which is a positive 2. And that's as low as we can go. So now we just go ahead and we look for our answer. The only thing is that they switch these around. So this positive 2 is actually first, and then the negative I or the minus I is second. So we have 2 minus I, which is choice 4. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at 17. It says, which of the following is equivalent to 5I times 6I? Well, 5 times 6 is 30, and I times I is I squared. So 5I times 6I is 30I squared. Okay, so I kind of works like X does, right? X times X is X squared, so I times I is I squared. But because it's I squared, not X squared, we can go to our little cloud over here, okay, look at I squared and realize that I squared is equivalent to negative 1. And so this I squared gets replaced with a negative 1. And 30 times negative 1 is negative 30, which is choice 3. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at 18. Which of the following is equivalent to? Okay, so these are the higher powers of I, and we have to remember that we're going to divide by 4 so that we can match them in our cloud and do the same thing we were doing in 17 and 16. Okay, so here we go. The 5 is going to stay. The I to the 16th is going to get replaced. We're going to keep the plus sign. We're going to keep the 3, but I to the 23rd is going to get replaced. We're going to keep the plus sign, and I to the 26th is going to get replaced. So I always rewrite it first, so I know I have 3 things to find. Okay, I'm going to take my higher power of I to the 16th, and I'm going to take that 16, I'm going to divide it by 4, okay, because that's, remember, what you do. Okay, when I do 16 divided by 4, I get a 4. It's technically a 4.0 because 4 goes in 4 whole times, and there is no remainder. So you have to know that when you see that 4 and no decimal, that it's really a 0.0, and that's a tricky one for some of us. Okay, and so we're going to match it to the first thing in our cloud. All right, that I to the 16th is the same thing as I to the 0, which is equal to 1. And so now we can go ahead and replace that I to the 16th with a 1. All right, well, now we're going to go ahead and do the I to the 23rd. So we take our exponent of 23 and we divide it by 4. Okay, and 23 divided by 4, okay, comes out to be 5.75. And again, we don't care about the 5. Okay, just like we didn't care about the 4 here. We just care about the decimal, all right, the 0.75. And if we have our iCloud to look at, we realize that 0.75 matches up with negative I. And so I to the 23rd is equivalent to negative I, and we replace it. And now we got 26. So we're going to do our exponent of 26, and we're going to divide by 4. And 26 divided by 4 is 6.5. And again, we don't care about the 6. We care about the 0.5. Okay, and looking at our iCloud, all right, and 0.5 matches up with I squared, which is equal to negative 1. And so now we can take that I to the 26 and replace it with negative 1. All right, and now we just going to have to clean this up. All right, so the first thing I see here is 5 times 1, which is 5. Okay, then I see 3 times negative I, which is negative 3I. And then I have a minus 1. Okay, notice I dropped those plus signs out because I had negatives next to them. All right, when there's 2 signs in a row, you can always drop the positive out. All right, I have a little bit to clean up here. I have a 5 minus a 1, which is 4. And then I have that minus 3I attached to it. All right, and so I have 4 minus 3I. 4 minus 3I matches with choice 2. Okay, and then I got one more to go. So let's go ahead and take a look. In the number 19, it says if f of x is equal to this, then f of I is equivalent to. So we've seen this up above. All right. So what they're doing is calling f of x f of I, which means they're replacing all the x's with i's. So we're going to go ahead and replace all of our x's with i's. So we're going to have f of I equal to I squared plus 3 times I to the 21st minus 2 times I to the 68th. So all my x's became i's. Okay, and now we're going to go ahead and we're going to simplify these higher powers of I just like we did in the last problem. Okay, notice I can't see my iCloud on my video here, so I'm going to go ahead and redraw it so that we have one more chance of showing you how I would put this on my paper so that I can use it to get my answer. So we always start off with I to the 0, I to the 1st, I to the 2nd, I to the 3rd. All right, and then we go ahead and anything to the 0 power is 1. Anything to the first power is itself, which is I. And then this is the opposite of the first one, so negative 1. Opposite of the second one, so negative I. All right, 1I, negative 1, negative I. All right. All right, remember that our decimals, all right? And I told you to think quarters. So if you have 0 quarters, you have 0.0. If you have 1 quarter, you have 0.25. If you have 2 quarters, you have 50 cents, so 0.50. And if you have 3 quarters, think 75 cents, okay, or 0.75. All right, and so now that our iCloud is ready to go, we're going to take our exponents and we're going to divide them by 4. All right, so I to the 12th, we take 12 and we divide by 4 and we get 3. But remember, it's 3.0 because 4 goes into 12 3 whole times, no decimal, so 0.0, we're looking at the first thing. And we're going to go ahead and take our I to the 12th and replace it with 1. All right, we're going to go ahead and keep that plus 3, and we're going to go ahead and replace I to the 21st. So we're going to take 21. We're going to divide it by the magical number of 4 when we do our powers of I because they happen in a cycle of 4. And 21 divided by 4 comes out to be 5.25. Again, we don't care about the 5, just like we didn't care about the 3 here. We just care about the decimal. And so matching the 0.25 into our cloud, and we realize that it's equivalent to I. So I to the 21st comes out, I goes in, okay? Keep the minus 2, and we're going to do the same thing with I to the 68th. We're going to take our 68, we're going to divide it by 4. 68 divided by 4 is 17, but you have to remember that it's 17.0. 4 goes into 68 exactly 17 times, no remainder, so we have that 0.0 matching it to our cloud. We're going to end up with 1 replacing it. Okay, and then we're just going to do a little math to clean this up. So 1 stays 1, 3 times I is 3I, negative 2 times 1 is negative 2. Okay, you got a 1 here and a minus 2 here, which is negative 1 plus 3I. Negative 1 plus 3I is choice 4. All right, and so that's how those I problems are simplified. All right, I will see you guys on the next day of notes, all right, for some more imaginary work. Okay.